right, guys, this is another episode of the Shared Practices podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Dr. Andrew Clingan. Hope everybody's doing well today. Wherever you are, wherever you're listening to this, hope things are going well for you. Down here in Birmingham, Alabama, we are into the thick of summer. It's heating up. People are going on vacation. I'm going on vacation next week. Really looking forward to that. It's really important to get away from the busyness of a dental practice from time to time and enjoy time with your family. So been a full few months for me at the practice, been balancing a really great growth with and pulling out of what we call an ugly duckling phase with our associate, coupled with also new associate recruitment at our office and hiring new team members and other team members stepping into bigger positions and expansion in the facility and just all sorts of fun stuff in the life of a practice owner, but also very busy. And so looking forward to some time off next week, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. I wanted to spend some time today talking about what it looks like for dentists and specifically practice owners, but really any dentist to hone in and get clarity on like what your vision for your work looks like, what your vision for your life looks like. Here at Shared Practices, we appeal to a lot of younger doctors. And so this is a topic that we hit on a lot, and it's fresh and top of mind for me today because I was just having a conversation with another dentist, another young practice owner last week in a different part of the country. And this guy and I have a connection. He hits me up and says, "Hey, Andrew, can I call you? I have some questions." I said, "Sure, happy to share anything that I can offer for you." And so hop on the phone with this guy, start catching up with him. Really great to do that. And he starts sharing with me where he's been in his practice journey. And by all accounts, this guy's been off to a stellar start. He's like 18 months, maybe 24 months into ownership at this point. And he's sharing some of the numbers he's done with me. And I'm like, dude, you're like a success story. You're like top 5 or 10%, right? And I think he's somebody who kind of just, in hindsight, didn't have a ton of clarity, found this opportunity. And because he's a talented individual, has made a lot of things work. And he's sharing all of this with me. But at the same time, he's framing with me and just has all these questions around, hey, man, I think like my acquisition, I've like gotten to the end of all the treatment that needed to be done in the practice. We call that the honeymoon phase here at Shared Practices. He's going, hey, I'm doing this big procedure. So like, should I optimize for this for full arch implants? What should I be doing to market? Like, do I need to take PPOs? Like, how should I get another dentist in here to work with me? Should I go do real estate? Should I go own other practices? And I'm embellishing a little bit, but the point you get is this dentist, even in the midst of lots of success, and I'm hats off to him and giving him his flowers and kudos, there wasn't a ton of like clarity. And I just stopped him and I was like, hey man, I don't think you have a marketing problem or a patient problem. I think you have a vision and a clarity problem. And maybe, there's a marketing problem or patient problem that exists downstream from that. But man, I think you're like getting the order of operations kind of out of line here. And because ultimately, what most and this is like the normal thing for most dentists. We get out, we get into the busyness of practice and life and all of this stuff. And most people, by sheer willpower and charisma and talent, find a way to make things successful. And what's cool about dentistry is you can kind of do that sometimes. By just sheer willpower, you can find success. But we tend to like get into our careers, we put our heads down, we look up out of nowhere, and we're in this point where we're like, what's next? And we just start throwing things at the wall and what sticks, right? And I think the end result that, occurs from this is we get into a point where we don't have clarity, and where we do not have clarity, we don't have traction. And we're just spinning in circles or we're rowing in opposite directions. We really recommend like the EOS books and their company here. And so if you've never read Traction or anything put out by Gino Wickham and the EOS kind of series, we always tell people to start there because to really get where you want to go and get there as fast as you want to go, you have to have like this alignment and people have to be rowing in the same direction. And that starts with you. And so you got to get clarity so you know where to focus your time and your energy. It'd be just like a dentist stepping into a big case and doing some big full mouth rehab and they didn't like properly plan it out beforehand, right? Like we would all look at that person and go, you shouldn't have done that, right? That's borderline irresponsible. But quite often with our own careers, we just hop into it. We start taking care of it. We find a way to be successful, but we haven't really taken the time to sit down and get clarity. And so probably where I would start this conversation is just kind of like sitting down and going, hey, we're typically pretty fortunate in dentistry that you can like take the profession and the career and craft it however you want and make it look a lot of different ways. And that's super cool. And so I typically don't think there's a right or wrong answers. I think it's just what fits you, right? You can, to rip off Alex Sharp, choose your own adventure here. But the one thing that I would say you can't do is you can't have it all. And I would frame this by thinking of, in general, in this career, you can kind of pick one or two things you can optimize for. And generally, the ones that come up are obviously like clinical fulfillment, proficiency, business pursuits, and then maybe like the third one being like work-life balance. You probably could plug and play a few different other pursuits and goals here. But what I would generally say is like there's this three-pronged triangle for most dentists. And, do we want to optimize to be an excellent clinician to like the highest degree? Do we want to optimize to just be the CEO and builds some DSO from the ground up? Or do we want to optimize for just like this steady, slow career where we do well and we have like a pretty good work-life balance in that? And in general, like you're going to have to be pulled to one side or the other, right? It's really hard to be some monster CEO on that far into the spectrum and have work-life balance. If you're trying to build 20 practices, there's probably going to be a period in your life where that is asymmetrical and you do not have balance in that, right? Or, if you have kids at home and they're young and you want to go to the other side of the country and take a full mouth occlusion and full mouth like reconstruction continuum for a week at a time, you're going to give up time with your family. And I'm not here to say one or the other is wrong, but at the end of the day, we only have so much time, availability, mental capacity, and clarity. And so in general, I find that, and I'm guilty of this too, like I'm just the guy who, me and my coach Caitlin talk about this all the time. I just want to optimize for all of it. Like, how can I do all of it well? And in general, like there's going to be some sacrifices somewhere. And just like while we're talking about me, where I currently land is, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you maybe know my background in that, I started working with shared practices as a dental student. So that kind of created this genuine love for the business side of dentistry and just business and entrepreneurship in general. And so in that, like, yes, I bought my practice almost 3 years ago, continuing to grow it bigger. And I genuinely get fired up by adding systems and figuring out issues with patient flow and marketing problems and efficiency and expansion and the financing behind that and all of those fun things like that. Really, you can kind of hear the inflection in my voice there. It gets me excited. But I've also found, contrary to like some of the other voices on this podcast, that I like clinical dentistry a lot. And more than that, I really love like the patient interactions of just a general dentist, that I get to kind of create relationships with these people. And that's not some like marketing ploy, like that's genuine. I enjoy like this recurring, hey, I get to see you every 6 months and just kind of hear what's going on in your life. And obviously like I have favorite patients, and I have some that I wouldn't be hurt if they found a different dentist, right? But I like those things. And so like, how do I, reconcile those two things? And the honest truth is, early in my career, I'm still kind of like working through that. The difference is right now is I'm choosing to kind of go broad and give up some efficiency in certain areas for the opportunity to get more focused later on in my career. And we'll hit that later on. But in general, like think of this as like a triangle, You're pulled to one side, like two different points on the triangle. I wish I had a little paper to write on here. You can be pulled to one extreme and you're not going to be good at anything. You can be in the middle if you want to, and you're probably going to be average at most. But in general, you can't have it all. There has to be something that, and I think that's important to recognize on the front end, because the drift happens for dentists. And here's where it starts. We graduate dental school and it kind of gives us an identity. We're a dentist, we're a doctor, but it doesn't always give us like a ton of vision and clarity. And my generation of dentists is different because we are presented with the extremes every day. And what I mean by that is we get on the internet and we see, the cosmetic dentist who takes this beautiful photography and does this beautiful work and can produce 40 to 50K a day with their own hands, right? Or we kind of see the person with the podcast who's growing 40 practice DSO. And we see like these extremes and these highlight reels of people's life. And to us, we see that and we go, oh, I got to choose to do this or this. I want to be as impressive as the Instagram dentist, or I want to be as successful as the person who started, a 40 or 50 practice DSO. But in reality, like, we don't always have the clarity on what makes us happy. The reality is most of us are not extreme personalities. Maybe we're not extremely artistic like the cosmetic person is, or have extremely good people skills like that person. Or a lot of people, myself included, probably doesn't have like the intestinal fortitude or guts to get to where it takes to build a 30 practice DSO, right? And that's okay. Like, I think in life, most of our success, spoilers, found by just kind of choosing our path and staying consistent on that year after year. And that's kind of where I fall. I think typically in life, whether I'm a dentist or just as a husband or friend or whatever, the best spot typically falls in the middle somewhere. It's not on the far right or left end of any sort of spectrum we're looking at. Typically, like, the best balance is right there in the middle. It's the just right. It's this fits for people. And so I think, though, like, young dentists from an early age just get inundated with like, oh man, you gotta create 10 practices from scratch and have multi-practice ownership, or you gotta be the person for cosmetics in your area, right? And we get sold on all this. And that's what's so great about, I think, our philosophy around practice management at Shared Practices is that for things to work and be successful, you don't have to be either of those things. If you are those things, that's great, and it can accelerate your growth and where you're wanting to go. But just the everyday average person can find a way to have success within the frameworks that we teach our coaching clients. And so I think that's really great. And I think that's something that, like, young dentists need to hear and go, man, I don't like, for me to be happy in life and be successful, and, like, spoiler, success, I don't think is really related to finances as much as we would think it is. It's like, okay, what makes us happy, and what's like the right temperature and the right speed for us to kind of go. With that being said, though, dentistry has changed a little bit. Okay. And while I would really argue that you don't have to be an extreme, and most people should not chase after that extreme, it has changed a little bit in terms of the floor. And what's historically been great about dentistry is that there's a high barrier to entry, there's high debt, but like this consistent floor for the general dentist. Your hygiene department carries you, just kind of handling it. And you don't have to, you never had to be just a stud or a top performer or a thoroughbred to make it work. But that has changed a little bit, to be honest. I'm still going to argue that you don't have to be the extreme, like, super producer or business person or CEO to make it work. But if you're really wanting to generate, like, significant wealth in dentistry, you have to be a top performer in some category. Just being the average Joe and a practice owner these days, unless you're super rural in a non-competitive area, it's just not going to cut it. Like, and generally, like, when you think about geography and insurance reimbursements changing and the staffing crisis that we're dealing with these days and the skills, it's harder than it used to be. And so my argument typically when I'm talking to dentists is you have to be excellent in one of two areas. And that's, you have to be an excellent clinician and communicator. I would argue if you're an excellent clinician but not a good communicator, it doesn't matter. Or you have to be an excellent business person, or go in a non-competitive spot, right, where no one else wants to live. And the degree to where you kind of chase either of these three directions, I think, is also kind of right in line with, like, how much success you want and how much your appetite is for income and career satisfaction, right? You can make good money just doing the normal stuff, being, hitting your singles and your doubles, but you can't do that if you went to a private school and racked up $700K in debt, right? You have to be honest about the math. And generally, like, we see all these, like, top performers, and when we're thinking about, okay, what does it take to make it as a dentist these days? What I would really argue of what makes someone a top performer isn't purely just clinical skill or business acumen. It's someone's, like, commitment to the process. Like, are you willing to sit there and do the boring thing on repeat for years after years? Like, yes, that can make you very successful, right? And so what you're really kind of discovering here is there's typically not a one-size-fits-it-all approach for people, right? What I would say, like, doesn't fly anymore is you can't just hang a shingle, have your license, and automatically be a millionaire. It's just true. Like, you have to be very intentional in some shape or form. And so you either say, I'm going to be an excellent clinician. I'm going to invest in my clinical skills and my patient communication and get people to trust me and earn a lot of money that way and not be as dependent on reimbursements for, two surface posterior fillings. Or you say, hey, I'm going to be really good at business. I'm going to know how to market. I'm going to know how to train people and retain staff, right? And recruit. Or you just kind of say, hey, I'm going to head out rule and just have an excess of patients. Or you say, hey, I'll do like some combination of these things, and I'm just going to do it steady for 30 years. I'm not going to be financially independent when I'm 40, but I'm going to show up, do average to above average dentistry, have an average to above average business acumen, right? Maybe not be in the middle of a major metropolitan. And I'm going to do that for 30 years, and I'm going to save 20% of my gross income. And I'm going to look up at 60. I'm going to plan to retire. And I will have probably lived a pretty good life. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, once again, in the age of like Instagram reels and chasing after what other people have done and being a full arch, master and being the cosmetic dentist, like, that doesn't sound super appealing. But honestly, how many people would kill for a job where they work 4 days a week, cash flow multiple six figures a year, even after debt service for most? Yeah, you deal with the public and dental care, which stinks sometimes, but like in general, like, can kind of get into whatever interests you in your work. You can kind of craft your own adventure on that. Like, most people would kill for that. And so while it's definitely changed and the floor is different for dentists than it used to be, there's still like just so much opportunity for you to figure out what makes you happy. But what really needs to happen is the clarity that we talked about. And here's, while we're talking about that, here's, I think, what the middle looks like for most people. I'll put this in terms of like our shared practices acquisitions, right? You hear us talk a lot about productive solo and profitable group and super solo and mega group. You really hear us talk about like mega group and super solo, right? Those are kind of like the extreme high performing options in our avatars. But, the profitable group is like a pretty comfortable place to get to once you can get there. You got 2 doctors, maybe 2.5 to 3, maybe. Use the owner. You're probably never going to be free of doing clinical dentistry yourself, but it's also not on you, right? Like, you can show up, work, take a few weeks off a year, work your 4 days a week, and you're kind of free from this grind of the solo dentist whose everything is on them, but you're not fully like sitting on a beach and making passive income. But it's just like a good, fairly predictable, once again, like, most people can probably get to a point where they have 4 hygienists and 2 doctors, and they're, grossing north of $2 million in a year. Like, I would argue that takes a good dentist, an above average performer, but it doesn't take like an all-star to get there, right? Or even just a profitable solo. Like, you show up, do your thing, good team, low overhead. The upside's not as high as a big group, but the floor is comfortable. You kind of know what you're going to make every month. You get a big case here and there, maybe add 10 grand, right? And this, like, for people who don't want to manage a big team, but also don't have this like appetite to be running around checking 3+ hygiene and doing a bunch of specialty work and that sort of thing. So for most people, like, this middle of the road, once again, if you just show up and do that for 30 years, you're going to be fine at the end of the day, right? You may not be taking like Instagram worthy vacations all the time and driving $100,000 cars and having expensive watches, but you're going to have what you need and then some. You're going to be way better than the average American over time. Once you kind of get your practice settled and have the right team in there after a while, like, things are going to feel pretty comfortable. And like I said, this middle of the road for most people, it doesn't get a lot of flash. We get the extremes, right? Should I be doing full arch or getting new patients or buying multiple practices or being a real estate group? And in general, like, we as dentists, we get so distracted by shiny object syndrome. So distracted. And it can be as big as like our pursuits, like I was talking about with this friend, or it can be even like technology and stuff. When in general, if we would just find what we want to do and be super consistent at that for 30 years, put our head down, do the stuff that's just boring but consistent, you're going to look up and you're going to beat most people, because most people, like, just, they get bored or they're not disciplined enough to stay consistent with that over the long haul. And so in general, like, I tell people to think about that. And that doesn't mean that you can't choose for like the wild extremes. If building a business excites you and you like the risk of expanding and scaling and it gets you fired up to deal with those sorts of problems, and gosh, you do not want to pick up a handpiece if your life depended on it, man, have at it. You can do it. It's getting harder than it was 10 years ago, but you can definitely do it. And in general, like my encouragement would be, especially to the young dentist, is while we're thinking about where we head here and how do we have clarity in this and how do we choose this path and what do we, what compromises do we make and what are our non-negotiables? I typically tell people, like, the more optionality you can build for yourself later on, the better. Because at the kind of the crux of this debate of like a dentist figuring out the vision for their career is the real issue and the reality that we as people change, right? Our life situations change, and we don't know. Most people get out of dental school around 26, 28 years old, something like that. And how in the world does a 28-year-old supposed to know like what makes the 50-year-old version of themselves happy? Because that's a completely different version of you, right? And in general, my answer to that is to give yourself options, right? Go broad early in your career. Do everything. Get a taste for everything you want to do, right? And I think here's maybe like where that looks like. For me, I mentioned earlier, like, very prone to, investing time in my business and building that. I do have above average business acumen. And so the obvious path for me is like, okay, Andrew, just keep building the business and keep going from there. Like, maybe you should own multiple practices one day. And heck, maybe I will. But in the meantime, I do enjoy clinical dentistry. I'm like, man, maybe I should double click on this for a little bit. And so I do spend a lot of time and effort and money taking CE to expand my skills. I go across the country and take week-long courses at a big continuum. And, I may look up one day, maybe I'm 45 and I'm non-clinical. And maybe I shouldn't have invested that much time. But in the meantime, it makes me happy. I'm happy taking the money out of my practice and reinvesting that in. And I think I will get returns on that in some shape or form. But I have options, right? At the same time, I do work on building my business. I'm working on building one practice to be as efficient as it can. And I'm not getting distracted by buying another office. One actually came up. It was so funny. Like a few weeks ago, somebody came to me. It was somewhere not far from me wanting to sell. It's kind of confidential. And the broker's like, I wanted to come to you first. I knew. It's kind of funny how those opportunities find us out. And I was really interested in it, and I looked at it, and definitely wasn't like a good acquisition target. Maybe been like a paper chart target in the future, but I just told the broker, I said, this is a distraction for me. That's all it is taking my focus off what matters, right? And so right now, I'm working on building the engine of my practice. I'm working on investing in my people skills, how I develop others, my clinical skills, right? I think the other part of like being able to go broad and give yourself optionality later in your career, in your life as a young dentist, is the side of personal finance and practice financing, right? Most of us grow up, we go to dental school, we're used to not having a lot of money, and then all of a sudden we get out and we're earning multiple six figures a year. And it's like, wow, like, what do we do with this? And in general, if you've heard me before talk about personal finance, I really encourage people to like, man, be as like conservative as you can early on. Because one, once you start spending the money, you're not going to roll it back. You're just not going to. But two, it just gives you so much independence, right? I think you can take that a little too far. Like, if anybody's familiar with like just financial topics, you hear about people talking about the FIRE movement a lot. Like, I'm going to save 60, 70, 80% of my income and retire at like 35 or 40 and then have nothing to do, and I'll just lay around. And I mean, I think for me personally, that sounds kind of miserable. I think most of us are driven enough to get this degree and want to work. So yeah, I mean, me and my wife, we enjoy our lives, but I'm a lot more conservative right now than I think I might need to be later in my career, because guess what? It gives me optionality. Like, it would be nice to look up in my 40s, early 50s and be like, oh wow, we're coming up on financial independence here. Andrew, what do you want to do? You just want to keep going and spend more money? Great. You want to taper down your days? And I think, once again, we never know what that's going to look like in our life until that time comes, right? How family plays into that, how maybe your contentment with the career and doing things plays out. But I think the more optionality you can give yourself is great. And like, shout out to Dentist Advisors. I'm a client of theirs. They talk about that a dentist saving 20% of their gross income is going to retire well, right? And like I said earlier, you can just kind of choose that middle of the road, do things at a pretty high level, don't have to be world class. You can save 20% of your gross income, and you're going to look up in your 60s and you're going to be just fine, right? But you could also work really hard to invest in your CE at an early age, And you could give up the fancy house and the nice cars at an early age because one who even really cares about all that. You don't have to like have designer clothes or take big trips, and you can give yourself options later on. And guess what? If I want to keep working and I want to develop, a taste for expensive watches, then I guess I could do that at some point. It's not who I am personally, but I think for most of us, the name of the game here is being like conservative and getting very clear early on and give yourself those options, right? And so, my encouragement to young dentists is like, do whatever you can to invest in your skills early on, people skills, right? Clinical skills. Do what you can to get in practice ownership if you're built for that. And I think most dentists can handle practice ownership. There's a small percent of dentists who probably never should own a practice. And that's a different podcast episode for a different day. But yeah, man, like figure out what that looks like for you. Don't rush. Don't get distracted by things. Kind of choose, hey, here's what my vision looks like. Here's what my focus needs to look like. And then put your time and your energy into that. Don't put your time and energy into implants and cosmetics and marketing and recruitment and real estate and all these different things while you're at the same time kind of maxing out your personal lifestyle and spending more and more money, right? Find a way early in your career to be very focused and very conservative. And you can taper that up or down however you want to fit your lifestyle and your wants and desires. But I think like the main thing people need to hear is you can't have it all, and you need to have a game plan. You can't just show up and start throwing things at the wall and see what sticks, right? And so what I would encourage people is just kind of a practical tool as we begin to wrap this up is sit down, use things like a time and energy audit, right? Like write down the things you do and figure out what fires you up and what doesn't, right? I talked about that I love business, but I'll tell you what I hate is like managing staff debacles and, views and stuff like that. So like training an office manager to handle some of that. But I love investing in people and building people up. And to some extent, you can't have one without the other because people are messy. But like a few months ago, I did the same exact exercise myself. I sat down everything I did throughout the week and said, this is what I'm neutral on. This is what I love. This is what I hate. And I'm actively like taking the things off that I don't like and delegating them to leadership in my practice, right? I'm doubling down on the things that I do like. And being conservative early right now, it buys you room to invest in your practice in those skills. And later on, you can taper that up or down however you want to. You can retire in your 40s. You can take bigger trips, whatever you want to do, right? We still kind of argue here at Shared Practices that even though dentistry's really changed in the last 10 years, you can still kind of have whatever you want. You just got to be a lot more intentional and disciplined about getting there. And I think like 80% of dentists are capable of doing that. And my biggest encouragement is taking the time to sit down and just have dedicated time to get clear on this. Have yearly, quarterly reviews for yourself. What was important to me 18 months ago? Is that still important to me now? What goals did I create 18 months ago? How am I, taking them off their list? And I think just doing that kind of gives you an upper hand and puts you ahead of most dentists because you have a roadmap now, right? And there's nothing that says the roadmap can't change later on. But I would argue clarity early on, even if you want to course correct, gets you further to your North Star or your end destination than just showing up and turning all over the place and kind of figuring out, oh, maybe this works for a while or that. And so that's my encouragement to people today. That's kind of what I would push on people to lean into and to ask yourself the hard questions and figure out and get that clarity early on, because the earlier you can get there and the more focused you can be in your time and staying consistent in that stuff, that's what gets you to the end goal. That gets you to where you want to be. No one's on there on YouTube or TikTok or Instagram Reels and they're talking about that. But that's the real magic. It's just figuring out, getting clear, and staying consistent for a very, very long time. So, solo episode. That's all I have for today. Appreciate you guys listening, and we'll catch you next time on the Share Practices podcast.